When a rookie takes aim at the very foundation of a professional sports league, it usually ends with a fine, an apology, or a quiet burying of the story. But Caitlin Clark is not your typical rookie. In fact, her recent six-word remark might go down as one of the most perfectly timed challenges to WNBA authority in history. "I wouldn't miss a call." 6 words, delivered calmly on Super It's respected podcast, carried more explosive weight than a championship buzzer beater. And the timing of it all? Flawless. She wasn't coming off an emotional loss, she wasn't caught venting in a locker room scrum, she delivered her shot with precision, in front of a microphone that guaranteed her words would echo far beyond basketball. But let's be clear, this was not just a stray comment about refereeing. This was a carefully chosen moment in a league already dealing with what many insiders are calling its most severe officiating credibility crisis in years. Questionable calls were flooding social media, players were risking fines just to vent their frustration, and fans were tagging the league in viral clips demanding accountability. Into that storm walked Caitlin Clark, the rookie whose jersey sales, ticket draws, and TV ratings have already made her the face of the WNBA's future. And instead of playing it safe, she fired a shot directly at the institution's softest spot, its integrity. The power shift was instantaneous. Fans clipped the moment and spread it across every platform imaginable. Hashtags trended nationally, pundits debated her words on TV, and suddenly, what had been dismissed as background noise from frustrated veterans was now the lead story of the week. Clark's platform, timing, and status transformed her from star rookie into the league's most dangerous critic. In that moment, it wasn't the referees who controlled the game, it was Caitlin Clark, and the league knew it. To understand why Caitlin Clark's words detonated the way they did, you have to look at the backdrop she stepped into. The WNBA wasn't enjoying a moment of calm stability. Far from it. The league was knee-deep in its worst officiating crisis in years. A crisis so visible that even casual fans scrolling social media couldn't miss it. Clips of questionable fouls, no calls, and inconsistencies were going viral within minutes of final buzzers. It wasn't just the hardcore basketball junkies dissecting plays anymore. Mainstream audiences were mocking the league's refereeing decisions in real time. Every game seemed to come with at least one headline about officiating mistakes, and the credibility of the league's product was eroding right in front of the public's eyes. Players weren't staying quiet either. In fact, multiple stars' names the league typically holds up as role models were risking fines to publicly criticize referees. Coaches were being penalized for saying exactly what fans were shouting from the stands. Instead of calming tensions, the commissioner poured gasoline on the fire with a soundbite that will likely haunt her tenure. No winning team complains about officiating. To fans, it sounded arrogant. To players, it felt insulting. The message was clear: if you complain, you're a loser. That tone-deaf dismissal turned what should have been an internal issue into a public war between league officials and its own athletes. And then came Clark. Not just any player, but the rookie phenom whose face is on the tickets, whose highlights fill ESPN's reels, and whose presence is single-handedly boosting TV ratings. Imagine the volatility of that environment. Referees under fire, players seething, fans distrustful, and leadership appearing defensive instead of transparent. Into this powder keg, Caitlin Clark dropped her 6 words. Timing matters. And in this case, it was everything. She didn't just call out a missed whistle, she spoke to a frustration everyone already felt. She became the voice of a silent majority. And when the biggest marketing engine in your sport says what your athletes and fans have been shouting for months, it ceases to be a complaint. It becomes a crisis. In sports, timing is everything. A great shot taken at the wrong moment is just a wasted possession. But Caitlin Clark? She understands timing in a way few athletes ever do. What made her 6-word jab so devastating wasn't just the words themselves, it was when she chose to deliver them. Clark had just come off an injury, sidelined long enough to do something most players in the grind of a season can't, observe, while others were immersed in the chaos of competition. She was on the bench, studying patterns like a coach with a clipboard. She wasn't dealing with fatigue, adrenaline, or the fog of playing night after night. She was watching closely. And what she saw, according to insiders, was a trend of inconsistency and favoritism in officiating that no one could deny. This vantage point was crucial. Players in the heat of the game often experience tunnel vision. They feel fouled, they complain, they move on. But Clark had the full view. She could rewind, tape, analyze possessions, and connect dots that others missed in real time. By the time she spoke, she wasn't spouting frustration. She was presenting an argument built on evidence. That's why her words carried such credibility. Fans instinctively sensed it. This wasn't heat-of-the-moment whining. This was a considered statement from a player who had done her homework. The beauty of her timing didn't stop there. Clark also knew the season's context. Officiating debates were already dominating conversations. The commissioner's comment had thrown fuel on the fire, and social media was primed to erupt at the slightest spark. So she waited, watched the storm build, and then chose her platform. Not after a loss when critics could dismiss her as salty, not in a locker room scrum where her words could get buried in a soundbite. No, she waited until the perfect conditions converged. The league's credibility crisis at its peak, her own image spotless as a rookie recovering from injury, and an audience already listening. When she finally spoke, it wasn't just commentary, it was strategy. In essence, Clark's timing was a masterclass. She wasn't just another athlete complaining about referees. She was the face of the league throwing a punch at the exact moment her voice would echo loudest, and that timing ensured one thing: nobody could ignore her. Not the fans, not the media, and certainly not the WNBA itself. Words matter, but in today's media landscape, the platform can be just as important as the message itself. Caitlin Clark understood that instinctively. She could have dropped her critique in a random post-game interview where it might have been clipped, debated for a few hours, and then drowned out by the next day's highlights. She could have vented during practice or on her own social media where it would have been dismissed as youthful frustration. But Clark didn't do that. She chose Sue Bird's podcast, the single most respected media platform in women's basketball, as her stage, and that choice turned her 6 words into a cultural event. Think about the significance here. Sue Bird isn't just a WNBA legend. She's a figure with credibility across sports, culture, and media. When athletes appear on her show, they're not just speaking to basketball fans, they're speaking to journalists, influencers, activists, and even casual sports viewers who respect Bird's voice. It's a platform that guarantees reach and, more importantly, legitimacy. By saying what she said there, Clark wasn't just venting. She was filing a public record, one co-signed by a Hall of Famer whose reputation adds weight to every conversation. It was like stamping her critique with an official seal of authenticity. And Sue Bird's reaction mattered too. When Clark dropped the now infamous "I wouldn't miss a call," Bird didn't roll her eyes or dismiss it. She smiled, tilted her head, and gave the kind of reaction that said she knew exactly how powerful that moment was. That small acknowledgement signaled to the audience that this wasn't noise, it was news. Bird's platform amplified the comment, but her presence validated it. That's why entertainment outlets picked it up. That's why it ricocheted beyond basketball Twitter. And that's why league officials, who might have otherwise brushed it off, were suddenly scrambling. This was no accident. Clark chose a podium that would elevate her voice above the chaos, ensuring her words reached every corner of the sports world. She played the media game with the precision of a veteran, not a rookie. And by aligning herself with Bird, she also sent a subtle message. This wasn't just Caitlin Clark versus the WNBA. This was Clark positioning herself within the lineage of legends, drawing on Bird's credibility to strengthen her own challenge. In one interview, Clark turned a critique into a headline, a conversation into a movement, and a player's voice into a power play. Sometimes history doesn't turn on a paragraph, or a speech, or even a fiery rant. Sometimes it shifts on a single, razor-sharp line. Caitlin Clark's moment came in just 6 words. "I wouldn't miss a call." Simple, calm, delivered without theatrics. Yet the weight of that statement shook the WNBA to its core. Why? Because those 6 words carried more layers than most post-game press conferences combined. First, the tone. She didn't shout it, she didn't sneer, she didn't wrap it in anger, she said it lightly, almost playfully, like a joke shared between 2 insiders who both knew there was truth behind the punchline. That tone mattered. It gave her cover, made it impossible to accuse her of a meltdown, and kept the delivery sharp without being reckless. Reporters noticed, fans noticed, even Sue Bird noticed, tilting her head and flashing a knowing smile that silently told the audience, "You just heard something big." Second, the subtext. Clark wasn't talking about one bad whistle in one bad game. She was questioning the entire integrity of officiating in the WNBA. "I wouldn't miss a call" implied not just human error, but systemic failure, an insinuation that the referees, and by extension the league, weren't holding up their end of the bargain. Coming from a rookie who also happened to be the league's brightest star, that wasn't a complaint. It was a challenge, a dare, a statement of authority from someone who, despite being new to the league, already had more power than anyone wanted to admit. And then there was the impact. Within minutes of the podcast clip hitting social media, fans were cutting it into highlight reels, pairing it with viral clips of missed fouls, and pushing hashtags like "Clark was right" into national trending charts. It spread beyond WNBA circles. Sports talk shows replayed it, pundits debated it, and fans began tagging her under videos of bad calls across the league as if deputizing her as the league's unofficial watchdog. In less than 24 hours, those 6 words had transformed her from star rookie to spokesperson for a restless fan base. The truth is, every league dreads this moment, when one player becomes bigger than the silence leadership relies on. And with 6 words, Clark cracked the wall wide open. No fines had been issued, no official reprimands released, But make no mistake, this wasn't business as usual. This was a shot at the very credibility of the league, delivered by the one player they cannot afford to ignore. The clip had barely left Sue Bird's podcast studio before it became fuel for a wildfire. Within minutes, fans had ripped Caitlin Clark's 6 words from the interview, captioned them, and launched them into the chaos of social media. What happened next was no accident. It was the raw power of a fan base that had been waiting for someone, anyone, to say what they had been screaming for months. I wouldn't miss a call. It wasn't just a comment anymore, it was a rallying cry. On Twitter, hashtags like Clark was right and fix the refs surged into national trending lists, gaining traction not only among basketball diehards, but also casual sports fans who might never have watched a WNBA game. On TikTok, edits appeared within hours, pairing her line with slow-motion replays of blown whistles and controversial fouls from across the season. Reddit threads dissected the moment like it was a Supreme Court ruling, with fans uploading side-by-side breakdowns of games to prove Clark's point. She had, without formally intending to, deputized an army of fans as her evidence collectors, each one scanning the league's games for the next clip to throw into her corner. The mainstream sports media couldn't resist either. ESPN segments, F-Zone debates, and YouTube breakdowns all zeroed in on the remark. Was Caitlin Clark out of line? They asked. Or was she simply saying what everyone knows? The beauty for Clark was this. By framing her words as a casual, almost playful remark, she had forced the league into a no-win situation. If WNBA leadership or referees tried to push back, they'd look defensive and petty. If they stayed silent, her words would dominate the narrative unchallenged. The league chose silence, and that silence only amplified the story. Fans smelled blood in the water. The absence of a league rebuttal became its own form of confirmation, a quiet nod that maybe, just maybe, Clark had struck a nerve too sensitive to address. Every day that passed without a statement, her words grew louder. Sports radio hosts mocked the WNBA's inaction. Columnists called it the loudest silence in professional sports this year. What had started as a soundbite had now become a movement, one with momentum that couldn't be controlled. The WNBA had seen complaints about officiating before, but never like this. Never with this velocity, never with this amplification, and never with a player so central to the league's business interests at the center of it. This wasn't Clark against a referee, it was Clark, backed by millions of fans and the nation's sports media machine, against the system itself. And that changed everything. Silence is a choice. And in professional sports, silence often speaks louder than any press release. When Caitlin Clark dropped her 6-word challenge, every reporter, every fan, and every executive held their breath, waiting for the league's response. Would Commissioner Kathy Engelbert step forward and defend officiating? Would referees issue a statement of professionalism? Would the WNBA spin Clark's words as just rookie frustration? The answer, nothing. Absolute silence. At first, some thought the league was playing it smart. After all, why pour oxygen on a fire that's already burning? But in this case, silence wasn't an extinguisher, it was gasoline. Every day, the WNBA failed to respond. Clark's version of the story became the only version of the story. Fans saw it as confirmation that she was right. Media outlets interpreted it as weakness. Even insiders whispered that leadership looked paralyzed, unsure of how to handle a rookie who already wielded more influence than anyone anticipated. Behind closed doors, sources described league offices as fractured. Some executives argued Clark needed to be pulled aside, reminded that criticizing officiating publicly crossed a line. Others warned that muzzling her would be catastrophic, turning her into a martyr in the eyes of fans and players. The referees' union complicated matters further. Some officials felt personally attacked, their professionalism questioned, but even within their ranks, a few quietly admitted the truth. Clark hadn't spoken out of nowhere. Data was showing inconsistencies, and her words had simply given the problem a face and a voice. The result was paralysis. Do nothing, and Clark's words dominate, unchallenged. Do something, and risk alienating the very player who's driving ticket sales, broadcast ratings, and sponsorship deals. The league chose the safer play. Silence. But here's the irony: by saying nothing, they actually said everything. They told fans they had no defense. They told players they were afraid of their star. And they told Caitlin Clark that she had successfully shifted the balance of power. For years, officiating complaints in the WNBA had been treated as background noise. Find a player, issue a vague statement, and move on. But Clark had flipped the script. Now, it wasn't the league disciplining players, it was the players disciplining the league. And Clark was leading the charge. By refusing to speak, WNBA leadership surrendered control of the narrative, and in doing so, they made Caitlin Clark's 6 words the most powerful statement in the sport. The real test of Caitlin Clark's statement didn't come in the podcast studio, or on Twitter, or even in the league offices. It came the moment she stepped back onto the hardwood. Because here's the truth. Once a player puts the spotlight on officiating, every whistle or lack of one becomes political theater. And when that player is Caitlin Clark, the rookie phenom carrying the league's ratings and headlines, the pressure was unlike anything the WNBA had faced before. From the opening tip of her very next game, you could feel it in the air. The referees weren't just calling basketball anymore, they were performing under a microscope. Fans in the stands roared at every foul against Clark, booed furiously at every no call, and exploded whenever she got to the free throw line. The arena wasn't just reacting to basketball, it was reacting to the narrative. "I wouldn't miss a call" had turned every whistle into a referendum on whether the league was listening to her. On the court, Clark herself seemed sharper, more assertive. She drove harder into the lane, baiting contact, daring officials to swallow their whistles. When she got fouled and didn't hear the whistle, she glanced at referees not with anger, but with a calm, almost knowing look, as if to say, "Everyone saw that. Everyone knows." And the crowd backed her up, chanting, jeering, forcing the referees to feel the weight of thousands of eyes, judging not just their calls, but their integrity. Suddenly, officiating Caitlin Clark wasn't just about keeping the game fair, it was about proving the league itself wasn't rigged against her. And here's where things shifted. Referees started giving her the benefit of the doubt. Contact that might have been ignored weeks earlier was now a whistle. Borderline plays went her way. Not every time, but enough that it was clear the balance had tipped. The league could pretend her words hadn't landed, but on the court, the evidence was undeniable. Clark had changed the calculus. Even opposing players noticed. A few rolled their eyes in post-game interviews, hinting that Clark was already getting superstar treatment. Others defended her, pointing out that she was simply demanding the same respect given to veterans. Either way, the fact that everyone, players, coaches, refs, fans, was now discussing officiating through the lens of Caitlin Clark's standard proved that power had shifted. In the WNBA, rookie players are supposed to earn their stripes quietly. Caitlin Clark broke that script. With 6 words, she not only demanded accountability, she got it. And the court, once neutral ground, had become her stage for proving that the balance of power was tilting in her direction. If you thought the noise surrounding Caitlin Clark would fade after a week, you don't understand how today's media ecosystem works. In 2025, controversy doesn't just get reported, it gets recycled, amplified, and monetized until it becomes inescapable. And that's exactly what happened here. Clark's 6 words had already gone viral online, but once the mainstream sports networks grabbed hold of them, the story became unavoidable. Every sports debate show suddenly had a Clark segment. ESPN's morning lineup opened with it, F-Zone's evening debates closed with it, and YouTube creators made hour-long breakdowns of the Caitlin Clark effect. It wasn't just about one comment anymore, it was about what her words represented. Analysts argued over whether Clark was too outspoken for a rookie, or whether she was being unfairly targeted by referees. Some claimed she was exposing long-standing WNBA problems, while others accused her of overshadowing her teammates. The one thing no one argued? That her words mattered. They did, and everyone was cashing in on them. The repetition turned her remark into a cultural talking point far beyond women's basketball. Mainstream outlets like CNN, the New York Times, and NPR started running stories about bias in women's sports officiating. Even late-night comedians used the line in monologues, joking that Clark had managed to call out referees without getting called for a technical. What was once a basketball conversation was now a national conversation, and the WNBA, still silent, was losing the ability to shape the narrative. The more the league stayed quiet, the more the media filled in the gaps. Some outlets speculated about favoritism, suggesting Clark's rising popularity forced referees to protect her on the court. Others ran deep dives into officiating data, showing discrepancies in calls involving rookies compared to veterans. And then came the comparisons. Clips of Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and Tom Brady icons who had similarly bent officiating through star power spliced alongside Clark's games. Suddenly, she wasn't just a rookie anymore. She was being spoken about in the same breath as the most powerful athletes in sports history. The pressure didn't just stay on TV. Sponsors noticed, ticket holders noticed, even casual fans who hadn't watched a game were suddenly aware of the Caitlin Clark officiating controversy. And that's the nightmare scenario for any league, when your officiating stops being background noise and becomes front-page news. Because once that happens, every mistake, every bad whistle, every missed call becomes magnified tenfold under the harsh glare of media attention. By this point, the WNBA had lost control of its story. The Clark comment wasn't just a soundbite anymore, it was a media ecosystem of its own, feeding itself, expanding, and pulling in new audiences daily. And the more it grew, the more impossible it became for the league to contain it. Caitlin Clark had forced the conversation into the mainstream, and the WNBA had no way to turn it off. If the WNBA thought Caitlin Clark's words would only stir up fans and media, they were mistaken. The deeper impact was inside the locker rooms, where players themselves couldn't agree on whether Clark was a hero or a headache. And here's where the story really turned volatile, because when a rookie sparks this kind of division, it doesn't just stay on the court. It reshapes the entire power dynamic of a league. On one side were the veterans. Many of them were blunt. Clark hadn't earned the right to call out officiating so publicly. For players who had spent years getting hammered in the paint without a whistle, or who had paid fines for questioning referees, Clark's boldness looked less like bravery and more like entitlement. Some whispered that she was getting special treatment because she was the league's golden ticket, the one player broadcasters couldn't stop putting on primetime. "If I had said that as a rookie," one veteran reportedly muttered, "I'd have been suspended by now." That sentiment, resentment mixed with realism, started spreading fast. But there was another camp. Younger players, rookies and second years, saw Clark as their voice. They admired her fearlessness. For years, they had felt overlooked, pushed around by older stars and officials who treated them as afterthoughts. Clark had broken the silence, and suddenly, they felt empowered to push back too. She said what we've all been thinking. One player told a reporter off the record, and just like that, Clark wasn't just a rookie anymore. She had become a rallying point for a younger generation. Inside her own locker room, the tension was subtler, but no less real. Some teammates worried that Clark's constant spotlight was distracting from team chemistry. Others quietly applauded her, even if they didn't say it aloud. The divide wasn't personal, it was philosophical. Should a player put herself above the league's unwritten rules? Should a rookie carry herself like a veteran leader? And most importantly, was Clark's fight helping or hurting the WNBA as a whole? Rivalries sharpened too. Players who already felt overshadowed by Clark's meteoric rise now had more ammunition. They could frame her as the league's favorite, someone who got both the whistles and the headlines. On the court, that translated into harder fouls, more trash talk, and games that felt personal. Clark wasn't just playing basketball anymore, she was playing politics. And every dribble, every whistle, every glance at a referee was layered with meaning. What made this divide especially dangerous for the league is that it didn't have a clear fix. You can fine a player for a comment, you can issue a statement, but you can't control how players feel when the lights go out, when they're sitting in the locker room, debating whether Caitlin Clark is the truth teller the league needs or a spotlight-chasing rookie who's rocking the boat too hard, too fast. And once a locker room splits, once trust fractures between players, no commissioner's memo can stitch it back together. Caitlin Clark hadn't just called out the refs, she had forced every player in the WNBA to pick a side.